Hey, there was a handprint on the inside of the cabin window. Not the outside, the inside, on glass that had not been touched since the cabin was locked up the previous fall. The lock was still on. The back door was still latched. And the handprint was not the size of a man's hand. It was smaller. But it was not a child's either. It was in between. That is the detail that bothered the woman who found it. Not that something had been inside, but that it had been standing there long enough to press its hand flat against the cold glass and look out at the tree line, at whatever was still out there. But to understand what she found, you have to go back to why she was there at all, and what the property owner told her before she got the key. Sarah had rented the cabin because she needed 10 days of quiet and had run out of places in her life that offered it. A bad year had quietly become a worse winter, and sometime in February she decided that the only thing that was going to save her second novel was distance from everything that wasn't it. She found the listing on a small rental site, the kind that still uses scanned photographs and does not bother with a review system. 2 bedrooms, hardwood forest, creek nearby, eastern Kentucky, peaceful and secluded. She booked it the same afternoon she found it. The property owner was a woman named Glenda, and she called Sarah back within the hour, not to confirm the booking, that was already handled, but to go over a few practical things. The signal up the hollow was unreliable, Glenda said. If Sarah needed anything, she should drive down to where the road met the county line and call from there. The key would be under the back step. The wood stove worked fine, but needed the flue opened all the way before lighting, or it backed up into the room. And if Sarah had any questions once she got settled, she should not hesitate to reach out. That was it. Glenda did not say anything about the back room. Sarah did not know to ask. She arrived on a Friday afternoon in early March, her car loaded with 2 weeks of groceries and a bag of books she probably would not read. The drive into the hollow was longer than the map suggested. A single lane of pale gravel that switchbacked twice before leveling out near the cabin. And the last quarter mile was soft enough from recent rain that she kept both hands on the wheel and drove it slow. The cabin appeared at the end of a short clearing. Dark wood siding, a covered porch running the full length of the front, one window catching the afternoon light and throwing it back amber. It looked like exactly what she had hoped for. Small, still, surrounded on 3 sides by hardwood forest, with the creek audible somewhere behind it. She got the key from under the back step. The back door opened with the stiff resistance of a frame swollen by moisture, and the inside smelled of cedar and coal ash and something slightly older than both. She left the front and back doors open while she unloaded the car, letting the air move through. The cabin was tidy. A 2-burner propane stove in the kitchen, a small refrigerator that hummed steadily, a row of hooks on the wall. The front room had the wood stove, 2 chairs, a lamp, and a small table beside the door with a guest book on it. Sarah noticed the guest book while she was wiping down the kitchen counter. She picked it up once the coffee was going. Most of the entries were short and cheerful. Hunters mostly, and a few couples. Good firewood, quiet nights. Saw 2 deer from the porch. The drive-in is rough, but worth it. A few mentioned the creek. One mentioned that the left burner on the propane stove needed coaxing to stay lit. Sarah read through them while the cabin warmed and the coffee finished, and she almost missed it. Near the middle of the guest book, a page had been removed. Not torn, removed carefully, taken out along the spine so cleanly that only a thin, pale strip of paper remained at the edge. The entry before it ended normally. The entry after it was dated about 2 months later. A couple from Tennessee who mentioned they had enjoyed the front bedroom and left a cheerful note about the view from the porch. Sarah set the guest book down. Old guest books sometimes had pages removed. People wrote things and thought better of them. She did not dwell on it. She found the back bedroom on her first walkthrough. It was slightly smaller than the front, with a window that looked toward the ridge rather than the clearing. The door opened stiff, same swollen frame resistance as the back door, but it opened fully. The room inside was clean enough. A metal bed frame with a decent mattress, a small dresser with empty drawers. She set her laptop on top of the dresser and pushed it close to the window so she could look toward the ridge while she worked. She thought the view might be useful for thinking. That first evening, she got 2,000 words written. The wood stove worked exactly as Glenda had described. Rain came down on the tin roof around 9, settling into the old structure the way rain does in places built before insulation, filling the rooms with a low, continuous sound that was not quite drumming and not quite silence. She made more coffee, sat by the wood stove, read her own pages back to herself. For the first time in several months, she felt like she had made a good decision. She went to bed in the back room just before 11. Sometime after that, she guessed around 11, though she had not checked the time, a sound pulled her partway awake. Not loud, a tapping. Slow and low, coming from the back wall of the cabin, the exterior wall directly behind the headboard. She lay still and listened. It had the rhythm of something moved by wind, a branch, a piece of loose siding, but slower than wind usually moves things, and more even. Tap, pause, tap, pause. She got up, took her flashlight to the back window, pressed her face to the glass and looked out. The beam reached maybe 20 feet into the dark. The creek was out there, audible, but lower than she expected for a rainy night. Almost subdued. No branches near the wall. The siding was plain and unobstructed as far as the light reached. The tapping stopped the moment the flashlight came on. She stood there for a few seconds, beam on the wet siding, listening to the rain and the creek and nothing else. Then she went back to bed. Old cabin. Cooling night air does things to old wood. She had read that somewhere, and she chose to believe it, because believing it was more useful than not. The second night, the tapping came back at the same time. She was more awake for it this time, and she lay in the dark and counted. 7 taps, a pause between each one, then silence for a few minutes, then 7 again. She told herself it was thermal contraction, or something small living under the back porch, or the creek moving a branch against the foundation. She turned the flashlight on. The tapping continued. That was different from the night before. She sat up. The beam through the window showed the same stretch of wet siding and the same reach of dark beyond it. The creek still sounded wrong. Too quiet for how much it had rained. She got up, pulled on her jacket, and opened the back door onto the small rear stoop. Cold air, wet ground. The creek maybe 40 feet out, barely audible. No branches, no animal movement, nothing her flashlight could find. She stood on the stoop for a full minute and heard nothing except the rain and her own breath. She went back inside and closed the back door. She was almost to the front room when she noticed that the back bedroom door, which she had left open when she got up, was now closed. She opened it. The room was the same. Bed, dresser, laptop, the dark ridge through the window. Nothing moved. She stood in the doorway and looked at the window, and then at the door, and then back at the window. Then she went to the front room, sat down by the wood stove, and stayed there until the rain slowed, and she was tired enough to go back to sleep. She would not think about the door again until the third morning. The third morning started normally enough. Sarah made coffee, sat at her desk, wrote 500 words she already knew she would delete, and turned over in her mind whether the tapping was worth mentioning to Glenda. She decided it was. Not the door. She had no explanation for the door that did not make her sound irrational, so she left that out. But the tapping, framed practically. Old siding, possible thermal issue. Just want to make sure nothing is structurally loose. She drove down the hollow until her phone found a signal and called Glenda from the gravel turnout at the county line. Glenda picked up on the second ring. Sarah described the tapping. Back wall, late evening, same rhythm 2 nights in a row. She kept her voice level, the way you describe a slow drain or a sticky window latch. A problem, not a crisis. Glenda was quiet long enough that Sarah pulled the phone away from her ear to check if the call had dropped. Then Glenda asked which room Sarah had been sleeping in. Sarah described it. Smaller bedroom, window facing the ridge, door that sticks a little when you open it. Another silence. Shorter this time, but different in quality, the kind of quiet that is not thinking, the kind that is deciding. Glenda said that room was sealed, had been sealed since 2009. The door had been nailed shut from the outside and the listing should not have included a second bedroom. She did not know why the door had opened. She did not know how Sarah had gotten in. She said she was sorry, that there had been some kind of error with the listing. And then she said, "Please don't sleep in that room again tonight." Sarah drove back up the hollow with the radio off and both windows down despite the cold. She went around the outside of the cabin before she went in. She had not examined the exterior wall of the back bedroom in daylight. She had looked at it in the dark with a flashlight, but looking and examining are different things. She walked around the rear corner of the cabin and stood in front of the wall beside the back bedroom window. 4 flathead nails, driven through the exterior siding into the door frame, 1 at each corner of the frame, and 1 on each side near the middle. The wood around them was weathered the same color as the rest of the siding. Old work, undisturbed for years by the look of it. But the nails were loose. She could see it before she touched them. The siding had compressed slightly around each nail head, the way wood does when something has worked steadily against it from the inside. She pressed one with her thumb. It moved a 1/4 inch without resistance. She stood in the cold morning air and considered 2 possibilities. Either the nails had worked loose gradually over time, wood shrinking and swelling through enough seasons that the door had eventually pushed free on its own at some point before Sarah arrived. Or something had worked them loose more recently. She could not tell which from looking at them, and she was not sure which answer she preferred. She went inside. She stood in the doorway of the back bedroom and looked at the window. She had not noticed it the night before in the dark, and she had not been looking for it this morning, which meant she almost missed it again. There was a handprint on the inside of the glass. Not smeared, pressed, palm flat against the surface, fingers slightly spread, the way you press your hand to glass when you want to feel the cold on the other side. The condensation around the edges of the print was still slightly disturbed, the way glass looks when something warm has been close to it recently and the air has not fully settled back. She held her own hand up beside the print without touching the glass. Smaller than hers, narrower in the palm, shorter in the fingers, but not small enough to belong to a child. Something between a child's hand and an adult's. Not a size she could place. She took a photograph with her phone. Then she stepped back out of the doorway and did not go into the room again. She called Glenda. Glenda listened without interrupting while Sarah described the nails and then the handprint. When Sarah finished, Glenda said, "Don't sleep in that room tonight. Come back in the morning and I'll explain." Sarah asked what there was to explain. Glenda said, "There was a family who stayed here before you. They reported something similar. I had the door nailed shut because the property manager at the time said it was easier than trying to explain what they reported." Sarah asked what they had reported. Glenda said, "Come in the morning. The road should be passable by then." The road was not passable that afternoon. Rain came down hard around 2 o'clock. The kind of sustained mountain rain that turns red clay to something that looks solid from a distance and is not. Sarah walked out to check the road once and came back with mud on her boots past the ankle. Her car was a low-clearance sedan with tires that had no business on a hollow road in those conditions. She was not going anywhere before morning, and she knew it. She thought about calling someone. A friend, her sister, anyone who would answer on a weekday afternoon. She picked up her phone twice and set it back down. There was no version of the conversation that did not end with someone suggesting she was overtired and letting her imagination get ahead of her. She was not sure they would be wrong. She wanted to not be sure. It was easier. She sat at the kitchen table with the guest book instead. She read the entries around the missing page again, more carefully this time. The entry immediately before the removed page was from a couple, no year given, dated late October. They mentioned the drive-in, the wood stove, the sound of the creek at night. The last line of the entry read, "Back room was cold even with the stove going, and the door," and that was where the sentence ended. Mid-thought, mid-sentence, the ink stopping cleanly at the end of a line, as if the writer had simply put the pen down and walked away. Not crossed out, not finished on the next line, just stopped. The entry from the couple 2 months later mentioned the front bedroom. They had stayed in the front bedroom only, as instructed. Sarah had not been instructed. She had walked into the back room on the first afternoon, pushed the dresser to the window, set up her laptop, and slept there 2 nights in a row without anyone telling her she should not. She closed the guest book and sat with that for a while. The rain did not stop. She moved her things to the front bedroom, kept every light in the cabin burning, and sat in the chair by the wood stove with her car keys in her hand. Not because she could go anywhere, just because holding them felt like doing something. Around 11, the tapping started, not from the exterior wall. She was certain of that now, sitting in the lit front room with the stove at her back and the keys in her hand. The tapping was coming from inside the back bedroom wall. Within the wall itself, not the siding, not the porch structure, not the foundation. From somewhere inside the cavity between the interior and exterior surfaces. Slow, even. The same rhythm she had counted the 2 nights before. 7 taps. A pause. 7 again. She did not move toward it. She sat in the chair and she watched the open doorway of the back bedroom across the front room, and she did not move. The wood stove ticked. The rain came down on the tin roof. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. And from inside the wall of the back room, 7 taps, a pause, 7 more. It went on for nearly an hour. Then, at a few minutes past 2 in the morning, the back bedroom door swung slowly closed. She watched it happen. The wood stove was burning low, and the air in the cabin was still. No draft she could feel. Nothing that should have moved a heavy interior door on a swollen frame. The door moved in a single slow arc, unhurried, and settled nearly flush in the frame. The latch did not catch. The frame was too swollen for it to catch properly. But the door sat closed and did not open again. The tapping stopped at the same moment the door closed. She stayed in the chair. She did not go to the door. She did not check the back bedroom window or look at the handprint or try the exterior nails in the dark. She sat by the wood stove with her keys in her hand, and she waited. And the cabin was quiet. And she watched the closed door of the back room until gray lights started showing under the front door. Then she pulled on her boots, walked out to her car, and sat in it with the engine running and the heat on high until the road looked dry enough to risk. Glenda arrived about an hour after Sarah called her from the county line. She walked through the front room without saying much and stood in the doorway of the back bedroom, not crossing the threshold, and Sarah held out her phone with the photograph of the handprint on the glass. Glenda looked at it for a long time. Not the quick glance of someone humoring a nervous guest. A long, careful look. The kind that means the image is being weighed against something already known. Then she handed the phone back. She told Sarah the remainder of her booking would be fully refunded. She said she was sorry for the error with the listing. She said she hoped Sarah had not been too frightened. She never asked to see the photograph again. Sarah sent it to a friend that afternoon, a practical woman who had grown up in a farmhouse in eastern Tennessee and had opinions about what animals could and could not do. The friend looked at it and suggested raccoon. They were surprisingly dexterous, she said. They could press against glass. The proportions could fit if the angle was right. Sarah looked at the photograph again. The proportions did not fit a raccoon. A raccoon's paw does not leave a palm print. This had a palm. 5 distinct fingers, clearly articulated, pressed flat with the steady, deliberate pressure of something that had been standing there for a while. Standing still, looking out. She never got an answer from Glenda about the family before her, or about what had happened in 2009, or about what the couple had started to write in that guest book before they decided not to finish the sentence. The cabin was listed for sale the following month. The online listing did not include a photograph of the back bedroom. The detail Sarah returns to is not the handprint, and it is not the tapping, and it is not the door moving by itself in still air. It is the guest book entry that stops mid-sentence. Someone had been in that room, in that same bed, and had sat down to write about what happened with the door, and had stopped. And what they had decided not to write, they thought it was better that strangers not read. Sarah checks windows now before she enters any room she is going to sleep in. Hotels, spare rooms, rentals, anywhere unfamiliar. She checks the glass from the outside first. Not every window, just the ones in rooms she will be alone in after dark. She checks them before she opens the door, and she looks at the inside surface of the glass. And she looks at whether the condensation has been recently disturbed. She has not been back to that part of Kentucky. The next account comes from a retired deputy in western North Carolina. He passed it along through a friend, asked that his full name not be used, and had one condition: that the detail about the ball be included exactly as it happened. Because that was the part, he said, that nobody had believed. Dale Carver spent 27 years as a deputy in a small mountain county in western North Carolina, and in that time he had learned to be skeptical of things that could not be explained, and patient with things that could not yet be. That is a useful combination in law enforcement. It is less useful when the thing you cannot explain is happening in a cabin your family has owned since before you were born. He had been going to that cabin every October since he was old enough to carry a rifle. One ridge over from where he grew up, accessible by a logging road that the county had never formally adopted, and that appeared on maps only sometimes and only approximately. The cabin was nothing elaborate. 2 rooms, a covered porch, a wood stove that worked reliably, and a generator that worked most of the time. His grandfather had built it in the early 60s. His grandfather's boots were still near the door. Nobody had moved them. It would not have felt right. Dale arrived the first Friday of October the same way he always did. Parked at the top of the logging road, hauled his gear down the slope in 2 trips, started the wood stove with the paper and kindling he kept in the tin box beside the hearth. Put a pot of venison soup on the propane burner. Wrote the date and weather in the paper logbook he kept in the kitchen drawer. The logbook went back 11 years in the same format. Date, temperature, sky, planned trail, observations. A practical document kept by a practical man. He tested the generator, found it working, decided he did not need it. The moon was clear and the timber was open, and he had been in that cabin in full dark enough times to be comfortable. He went to bed at 9:30 for a 5 o'clock start. He woke at 3:17 in the morning. He knew the time the way law enforcement people know time, automatically, without deciding to check. A line of pale yellow light showed under the front door, the particular color of the old incandescent bulb on the porch fixture. He lay still and looked at it for a moment. He had not left the porch light on. He never left it on. It ran off the generator, and the generator was off, and it was a waste besides. He got up and checked the generator first. Off, same as he had left it. Then the breaker panel on the kitchen wall. One switch was flipped. He could not explain when it had flipped. He put it back. The line of light under the door went out. He stood in the dark kitchen and listened. Timber. Wind low in the eaves, the wood stove settling. Nothing unusual. Old cabin, old wiring, a fault in an old switch. He went back to sleep. The second night he woke at 3:17 and the porch light was on. He checked the time first, then he got up and checked the breaker. Same switch, flipped the same direction. He put it back and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the porch and the timber beyond it for several minutes. Nothing moved. The dark between the two large oaks at the eastern edge of the property was just dark. He sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes before going back to bed, not because he was afraid, but because he was thinking, and thinking took the time it took. He wrote in the logbook before he slept. Porch light on 3:17 both nights, same switch. Generator off both times. Wiring fault possible. Does not account for the timing. He stared at that last line for a moment. Then he closed the logbook. The third night he removed the bulb. He unscrewed it from the porch fixture just after dark, brought it inside, and set it on the far edge of the kitchen table near the wall. He wanted to eliminate possibilities the way his training had taught him. One at a time, starting with the simplest. Without a bulb in the socket, whatever was flipping that switch could flip it all it wanted. He went to sleep. He woke at 3:17. He looked at the line of light under the front door. It was there. He got up slowly. He walked to the kitchen table. The bulb was where he had left it, on the far edge near the wall, and it was cold when he touched it. He walked to the front door and looked through the side window. The porch was lit. The socket had no bulb. The porch was lit. He stood at that window for a long time. Long enough that his feet went cold on the bare floor. He did not open the door. What he felt was not quite fear. He would say that clearly, later, to the friend he eventually told. It was more like the sensation of encountering a fact that has no category. Something that sits outside the filing system you have spent a lifetime building. After 27 years, Dale Carver had a very organized system for understanding what he encountered in the world. This did not fit anywhere in it. He watched the porch until the light went out on its own at 4:02. Then he went back to bed and lay there with his eyes open until 5. And then he got up and packed his gear and drove down the logging road in the dark without hunting. He did not tell his wife what had happened. He wrote one final line in the logbook before closing it. Third night, bulb on the table, porch still lit. No explanation I am willing to write down. He put the logbook in the kitchen drawer and drove home with the bulb in the passenger seat, wrapped in a dish towel. It would be 6 more years before he understood why 3:17 mattered. He did not go back that November. He told his wife the hunting had been slow and he had come home early, which was not a lie he was comfortable with but was easier than the truth. He went back the following October. Same ritual, same soup, same early bedtime. The porch light came on at 3:17. He flipped the breaker and went back to sleep and wrote the time in the logbook and nothing else. The year after that, the same. The year after that, the same. He stopped replacing the entry with any commentary. Just the time, just the date, just the two numbers, 3.17. 6 Octobers in a row, the same switch, the same time. And Dale Carver noted it with the same economy he had used for 27 years to note things he could not immediately explain and needed to return to later. What changed the 6th year was a conversation at the hardware store in town the morning after the first night, when Dale drove down for a replacement battery for his flashlight. The man who ran the hardware store was named Purvis, and he had been running it since before Dale was in high school. He knew everyone in the county by family name, and most of them by first name, and a few of them by things they would have preferred he did not know. When Dale came in that morning, Purvis was behind the battery rack pulling inventory, and the two of them talked for a few minutes the way men in small counties talk, about the weather, about the road conditions on the logging roads after last week's rain, about how the deer population had shifted since the timber company sold off the eastern parcels. Dale mentioned the cabin in passing. Not the light, just the cabin, the way you mention where you've been when someone asks how the hunting is going. Purvis looked up from the battery rack and asked which cabin. Dale said his family name. Purvis set down what he was holding. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Your granddaddy came in here asking about that same cabin. Said something had been happening up there that he could not make sense of. Said it had been going on since the winter of '71. Dale's grandfather had been dead for 12 years. Dale himself had not been born until 1965. He asked Purvis what his grandfather had said specifically. Purvis thought about it for a moment, the way older people think about things they witnessed a long time ago and are trying to be accurate about. He said Dale's grandfather had talked about a light on the porch, coming on by itself in the middle of the night. He had come into the store to ask about the wiring, whether old cabin wiring could develop a fault that turned switches on its own. Purvis had told him it was possible, but unlikely, and Dale's grandfather had nodded and bought a new breaker switch and driven back up the logging road. That was all Purvis knew. Dale drove back up to the cabin and sat at the kitchen table for most of that afternoon. His grandfather had come into that same hardware store, in that same county, and described the same light on the same porch. And whatever he had been told had not satisfied him, because if it had satisfied him, Dale's father would have mentioned it, and Dale's father had never mentioned it. Dale's father had used that cabin for 30 years and died without saying a word about a porch light that came on by itself at 3:17 in the morning, which meant either Dale's father had never experienced it, or he had experienced it and decided, the same way Dale had decided for 6 years, that there was no useful way to describe it to another person. That winter, Dale went through his grandfather's things. His grandmother had kept them in 2 cardboard boxes in the back of a closet, and after she died, the boxes had passed to Dale's mother, and after she died, they had passed to Dale, and Dale had put them in his own closet without opening them, because there had never seemed to be a reason. He opened them that December. Mostly it was what he expected. Old documents, a few photographs, a pocket watch that no longer ran, some letters. Near the bottom of the second box was a small field journal, the kind with a cloth cover and a red ribbon marker, the pages filled with his grandfather's handwriting in pencil. Most of it was hunting records, trail notes, animal sightings, weather observations, the same kind of document Dale kept in the kitchen drawer of the same cabin, which did not surprise him. What surprised him was the entry from November of 1971. It read, "Light on again, 3:17. moved the truck around to face the porch, headlights on, sat until 4 a.m. Nothing came out of the woods. Nothing ever does. But it's watching from the tree line. You can feel the watching, particularly from the gap between the two oaks on the east side. Have not told Ruth. No point in it. Dale read that entry 4 times. Then he sat with the journal open on the kitchen table and looked at the wall for a while. His grandfather had moved his truck to face the porch, had sat in the headlights until 4 in the morning, had noted the gap between the two oaks on the east side of the property as the specific place the watching came from. Dale had noticed that gap himself, standing at the kitchen window on the second night 6 years ago, looking out at the timber after he flipped the breaker back. He had noticed it and not written it down because he had not wanted to write down anything that suggested the experience was more than a wiring fault. It was not a wiring fault, and he had known that since the night he took the bulb off the socket. He went back to the cabin the following October with a camera. An old film camera with a long exposure setting, the kind that could hold a shutter open for 30 seconds or more in low light. He set it up on the kitchen windowsill on the first night, aimed at the porch and the gap between the two oaks beyond it, and he went to sleep. He woke at 3:17. The porch light was on. He lay still and did not get up and did not go to the breaker panel. He let it burn. At 4:02 it went out, same as it always did. He developed the film when he got home. Most of the frames showed nothing useful. Dark timber, the pale rectangle of the porch, the light source too bright for the surrounding exposure. But one frame, shot during the window between 3:17 and 4:02, showed something in the gap between the two oaks. Not clearly. The exposure was long enough that anything moving would have blurred, and whatever was in the gap had either moved during the exposure or was at the very edge of what the film could resolve in that light. It was a shape, vertical, roughly the dimensions of a standing figure, present at the exact center of the gap between the two trees. It could have been a deer. It could have been a trick of shadow and bark at that distance and in that light. It could have been a person standing very still with their back to the camera. It was there in every frame shot during the lit window. It was in none of the frames shot after 4:02. Dale showed the photograph to 2 people. One said deer. One said it was a processing artifact, a flaw in the film or the development. Both gave their answers quickly, the way people answer when they have decided in advance not to look too carefully. Dale did not show it to anyone else. He stopped hunting the property in October after that and started going in November instead. The porch light did not come on in November. It had never come on in November in all the years he could account for, going back to his grandfather's journal in 1971. He did not know why October was different. He had a theory that he kept to himself because it was not the kind of theory a retired deputy states out loud. The cabin is still in the family. Dale's son uses it now. Dale has not told his son about the light or the journal or the photograph or what Purvis said about the grandfather. He says his son has never mentioned anything unusual, and he says it the way a man says something he has not entirely decided how to feel about. Maybe it chose October because that's when we're there, he told his friend, the one who eventually submitted this account. Maybe it chose us. The bulb he took off the porch socket on the 3rd night of that first year is still in his garage, in a cardboard box on the shelf above the workbench, wrapped in the same dish towel he used to carry at home. He has never put it back. He has never thrown it away either, which is the part his friend found strangest when Dale finally showed it to him. A practical man who keeps a thing he will neither use nor discard. Dale said he was not sure why he kept it. Then he thought about it for a moment and said, "I think I keep it because putting it back feels like an invitation, and throwing it away feels like something else. He did not say what the something else was. The next account comes from a woman in her late 40s who grew up in a small community in southwestern Virginia. She did not witness what she is describing. Her uncle did. She is telling it because he will not. Not directly, not anymore. And because she found something in the county deed records that she believes changes what her uncle's story means. He stopped for gas at the Crossroads store about 4 miles from where the family land met the county road. It was a small place, 2 pumps under a metal canopy, a single room inside with a cooler along the back wall and a counter with a jar of beef jerky and a jar of peppermint candy, and not much else. The man behind the counter was maybe 70, lean and unhurried, the kind of man who has worked the same counter long enough that he no longer needs to be busy to feel useful. Earl paid for his gas and bought a cup of coffee from the machine near the door, the bad kind that came out too hot and tasted like the machine needed cleaning. The man asked how long he had stayed at the family cabin. Earl said 3 nights. He had not said anything about the cabin specifically. He had not said where he was coming from or where he was going. He had paid for gas and poured a coffee, and the man had asked how long he had stayed at the family cabin. Earl looked at him for a moment. He said 3 nights. The man nodded slowly, the way people nod when something confirms what they already suspected. He said, "You hear the creek talking?" Earl said yes. He was past the point of deciding whether to admit it. The man looked at the jar of peppermint candy for a moment, not picking it up, just looking at it. Then he said, "Don't answer it. Never answer it. Don't even look toward it too long after midnight. It's not the creek you'd be answering." Earl asked what it was. The man looked out the window at the pumps and the road beyond them and the tree line beyond that. He said, "Something that lives near water, something that's been here longer than the county has." He did not say anything else about it. He handed Earl his change and went back to whatever he had been doing before Earl came in. And Earl stood at the counter for a moment and then walked out to his truck and sat in it for a while before he drove. He had not told the man anything. He had not said what he heard or when he heard it, or that he had sat on a porch in the dark and listened to his wife's voice come out of a creek 2.5 hours from where his wife was sleeping. He had said 3 nights and yes and nothing else. The man had known anyway. Earl thought about that for most of the drive home. His niece started looking into the property after Earl told her the story, which he did not do for several years and did not do directly even then. He told it in the third person, past tense, like something that had happened to an acquaintance he was passing along secondhand. His niece recognized the cabin from the details and understood that he was talking about himself, and she did not push him on it. She just listened, and afterward she went looking. The family had held the land since the mid-1940s, when Earl's grandfather had bought the parcel from a man named Caudle, who was moving his family out of the county. The deed transfer was registered in the county courthouse in 1947 and was straightforward in every respect except one. Attached to the deed, clipped to the back page with a rusted paper clip, was a handwritten note from Caudle to Earl's grandfather. The note read, "Do not camp near the creek. Use the cabin only. Do not answer voices from the water at night." The note was dated 1947. Earl's experience at that cabin happened more than 50 years later. His niece photographed the note. She had it looked at by someone at the County Historical Society who confirmed the paper and the ink were consistent with mid-20th century materials, that there was no indication it had been added later. It was part of the original transfer. Caudle had written it before he handed the land over, and whatever his reason was, he had thought it important enough to put in writing. His niece looked into the 2 previous owners before Caudle and found that the first had sold the parcel after less than 2 years. No explanation recorded. The second, the one who had sold to Caudle, had held it for 6 years. In the county paper from 1931, there was a small notice that a man matching that owner's description had been found on the county road 3 miles from the property, disoriented, unable to account for how he had gotten there. The notice mentioned he had been staying at a cabin on the creek. It did not mention anything about the creek itself. His niece is careful about what conclusions she draws. She does not claim that these things are connected. She notes them. She says, "Here is what I found, and here is what my uncle told me, and I will let those 2 things sit beside each other and not force them into a shape they do not naturally make." But she also notes this. The morning Earl drove out, he said the creek was completely still. No current, no movement. He passed the bend where the water went around the limestone outcrop, and the surface was flat and unmoving, the way a creek looks in a photograph rather than in life. It had rained the night before. A creek that size, in that terrain, after an overnight rain, does not go still. There is no geological feature of that property that would cause it. Earl knows creeks. He worked timber in that county for 30 years. He knows what a still creek means and what it does not mean, and he knows that what he saw that morning was not possible. He drove past it without stopping. He did not look at it any longer than he needed to see the road. He never went back to the cabin. He kept paying his share of the property taxes for a few years, and then the family let the lease arrangement expire, and the land reverted to the county, and that was the end of it. He does not go near creeks after dark now. His niece says he will not talk about it directly no matter how the question is asked. He always shifts to the third person, always past tense, always a little removed, like keeping the distance of grammar between himself and what happened gives him something he needs. His niece has the photograph of the deed note. She keeps it in a drawer in her home in Roanoke, in a folder with the other documents she gathered during her research. She does not open the folder often. She says the note itself is not frightening to look at. It is just old paper with old handwriting and faded ink, the kind of document you find in county deed records all the time. What makes it hard to look at is what it means. Someone learned that rule. Someone learned it the way rules like that get learned, which is by finding out what happens when you do not follow them. They learned it, and they wrote it down, and they passed it on. And 50 years later, a man sat on a porch in the dark and heard a voice that knew his wife's name, and he did not answer it. And he drove home in the morning past a creek that had no business being still. She says, "I don't know what he heard. I know it knew his wife's voice well enough to use it. I know that's not something that should be possible. A creek learning the sound of a specific woman's voice. I know my uncle has not been back and will not go back. And I know that someone in 1947 knew enough to write that note before he handed that land to a stranger. That's what I know. That's enough." The folder stays in the drawer. She does not open it often, but she has not thrown it away either. She says she keeps it because the deed note is a primary document, and primary documents should be preserved. She says it in the tone of someone who has decided on a practical reason and is comfortable with it. The next account comes from a couple in their 30s who rented a cabin in the foothills below the Smokies through a private listing. They submitted it anonymously to a horror forum about 8 months after it happened, with a note at the top that read, "Details changed, but the important parts are true. We have not told this to anyone we know personally." Mara and Jonas had been together for 9 years and married for 4 of them, and they had not taken a real trip in 2 years because the 2 years before this one had been the kind that make trips feel like something that happens to other people. A medical situation that resolved, a job loss that resolved more slowly, and somewhere in the middle of all that, the particular exhaustion that comes not from working too hard but from being worried too long. When a coworker mentioned a private cabin rental in the Tennessee foothills, quiet, isolated, a little rough around the edges, but worth it, she said, Mara had written down the contact number before she finished the sentence. The property manager was a man named Gerald, and he was brief on the phone. The cabin was available the Thursday through Sunday they had asked about. The rate was lower than anything comparable. The key would be under a flat rock at the base of the porch steps, left side. If they had any questions, they could try his cell, but service in that area was unreliable, and he might not get back to them until they were already out. Mara said that was fine. She called Jonas from the parking lot afterward and said she had booked it. They arrived on a Thursday evening, later than planned because of traffic coming out of Knoxville. The cabin had green shutters and a covered porch and sat at the end of a one-lane gravel road that took 15 minutes to drive from the main county road, which itself had taken 20 minutes from the nearest town of any size. The key was where Gerald had said it would be. The front door opened into a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen along the back wall, and a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs. There were 2 small windows and a door that led to the bedroom and bathroom in the back. The floors were wide plank pine, uneven and worn. It smelled of wood smoke and something older that Mara could not immediately identify and chose not to think about. Jonas brought in firewood from the covered pile at the side of the cabin while Mara unpacked the cooler and the bag of food they had brought. She poured wine while he worked on the fire. They had not been this alone together in months. Not alone in the way that means no obligations and no schedule. Just the 2 of them and a room and time. And the first hour in the cabin felt like remembering something they had both been too busy to miss. Jonas made pasta with the ingredients Mara had packed. They ate at the rough table and talked, and did not talk about anything difficult. After dinner, Mara noticed the guest register on the high shelf above the fireplace. She got it down while Jonas washed the dishes, a thick spiral-bound notebook, the kind with a plastic cover. The first entry dated 1989 in looping handwriting that had the formality of an earlier era. She sat with it at the table and began to read. Most of the entries were what she expected: cheerful, brief, grateful, beautiful spot. Needed this. The drive-in is worth it. Saw a black bear on the ridge Saturday morning. The fireplace draws perfectly. She read through several years' worth, the handwriting changing with each new visitor, the tone varying from enthusiastic to perfunctory, but the content mostly similar. People had been coming to this cabin for 35 years, and most of them had been glad they did. She almost missed the pattern because she was reading for content rather than for repetition. It was only when she went back to check a date on an earlier entry that she noticed it. Almost every entry from 2003 onward mentioned a smell. Not the same smell. That was the thing that took her a moment to understand. Each person described it differently. One wrote about a faint sulfur smell near the back door that came and went over 2 days. Another described something like old meat in the walls when the heat had been running for a while. A couple from Georgia wrote about a sweet smell coming from the vent near the floor that they had initially thought was a propane issue, but which did not go away when they shut the propane off. Someone wrote earthy, like turned soil after rain. Someone else wrote wrong, just wrong, and left it at that. The entries before 2003 did not mention it. Mara went through the notebook twice to be sure. 35 entries covering the years 1989 through 2002, and not one of them mentioned a smell. Then the entries from 2003 onward, and almost every one of them mentioned something. Each description slightly different but pointing at the same experience, the same quality of wrongness, the same location near the back of the cabin. She called Jonas over and showed him. He read through several entries and said it was probably a dead animal under the floor. something that had gotten into the crawlspace and died and decomposed, and that over time the cabin had developed a persistent smell from it that varied depending on temperature and airflow. It was a reasonable explanation. It was the kind of explanation that makes a person feel better, and Jonas was good at those. That night, around 9 o'clock, they smelled it. Faint at first, sweet in a way that was not pleasant, not the sweetness of anything Mara could name, but sweet the way something is sweet when sweetness is the wrong quality for it to have. It came from the vent near the floor on the back wall of the main room, a rectangular iron grate set into the baseboard at the edge of the kitchen. Mara noticed it first and did not say anything for a moment, waiting to see if it passed. It did not pass. It shifted slightly, the way a smell shifts when the air in a room changes, but it did not go away. She pointed it out to Jonas. He crouched down by the vent and sniffed at it and made a face and stood up. He found the crawlspace hatch in the kitchen floor, a square panel of plywood with a recessed handle, and he lifted it and looked in with the flashlight on his phone. The beam showed insulation batting between the floor joists, old copper pipes running toward the back wall, a dirt floor below that was dry and undisturbed as far as the light reached. Nothing visible, nothing obviously dead or rotting. He moved the beam slowly across what he could see and reported nothing unusual. The smell got stronger while the hatch was open. Not dramatically stronger, just noticeably. Enough that Mara took a step back from the kitchen. Jonas noticed it too, and he lowered the hatch back into place, and it closed with a dull thud, and the smell faded over the next few minutes back to the faint background level it had been before. They did not discuss it at length. Jonas said again that it was probably an animal, something farther back in the crawlspace than the flashlight had reached, and that there was nothing to be done about it tonight, and probably nothing to be done about it at all, since it was not their cabin and not their problem. Mara agreed because agreeing was easier, and because she did not want the smell to be the thing they talked about on their first night away together in 2 years. She picked up the guest register again before bed. She had been reading from the beginning and working forward, but now she turned to the last few entries, the most recent ones, to see if anyone had mentioned it to Gerald or asked about it directly. Most of the recent entries were brief. A few mentioned the smell in the same passing way the earlier ones had. Nothing alarmed, just noted. The second to last entry was from a man who had stayed alone for a long weekend and had written 3 full paragraphs about how peaceful the cabin was, how he had needed exactly this kind of solitude, how he planned to come back in the spring. The last entry was 6 weeks old. It was 4 sentences. The first 3 described the cabin positively. Good fireplace, comfortable bed. The drive-in was easier than expected. The 4th sentence read, "Beautiful place. One suggestion. Do not open the crawlspace hatch. Trust me on this one." No explanation, no elaboration, just that, and then the person's initials and the date. Mara read it twice and then read it to Jonas. He looked at it and said the person had probably smelled the same thing they smelled and gotten spooked, and that it was nothing structural, nothing dangerous, just an unpleasant smell from something dead under the floor. He was not dismissive about it. He read the entry carefully and thought about it before he spoke, but he arrived at the same practical conclusion he had arrived at before. Mara closed the register and put it back on the shelf, and they went to bed. She did not sleep well. Not because of anything she heard or saw. The cabin was quiet. The bedroom was dark. Jonas was asleep within 20 minutes. She lay awake because of the entry, the specific phrasing of it. Not "don't open the hatch because of the smell," or "don't open the hatch if you're sensitive to odors." Just don't open it. Trust me on this one. The kind of phrasing that means the person writing it knows that a full explanation would not be believed. Around 1 in the morning, she heard a sound from beneath the floor. She lay still and listened. It was slow and low, coming from directly below the bedroom, from the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Not a scurrying sound, not the rapid movement of a small animal. Slow, deliberate. The sound of something shifting its position, something with weight rearranging itself the way a large animal rearranges itself when it has been in one position too long. It lasted maybe 15 seconds and then stopped. She did not wake Jonas. She lay still for a long time after the sound stopped, listening to the cabin. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The fire in the main room had burned down to coals, and the cabin had cooled slightly. The floor above the crawl space was silent. She told herself it was an animal, a large one, a raccoon or a possum that had gotten under the floor and was moving around in the insulation. She told herself this clearly and methodically and with some success, and eventually she slept. In the morning, she did not mention the sound to Jonas. She was not sure why, partly because in daylight it seemed less significant. Partly because she did not want to spend their trip being frightened by something that was almost certainly ordinary. And partly, this she admitted to herself but not to Jonas, because she had not fully decided what she thought the sound was, and she was not ready to say it out loud to another person. That evening, Friday, around 10 o'clock, while they were sitting by the fire in the main room, the crawlspace hatch moved. Not dramatically, not thrown open. It lifted at one edge, just barely, an inch, perhaps slightly more, paused in that position for 2 or 3 seconds, and then settled back down. The latch did not catch when it closed. The hatch sat in its frame slightly askew, a thin dark line showing at the lifted edge where it did not quite meet the surrounding floor. They both saw it. Jonas was on his feet before Mara processed what she had seen. He crossed to the hatch and stood over it, and looked at it, and then looked at the rest of the kitchen floor around it, as if the explanation might be visible somewhere nearby. He tried the latch. It did not catch properly. He pressed the hatch down with his foot and it seated more firmly but still not flush. He stood there for a moment, and then he came back to the fire and sat down. Neither of them said anything for a while. Jonas drove to the gas station the next morning for ice. It was the nearest commercial anything, 40 minutes on the one-lane gravel road and then the county road. And the woman behind the counter was in her late 50s with the particular manner of someone who has worked a rural counter long enough to recognize the look of a person who has spent a bad night somewhere nearby. She asked which cabin on that road. Jonas described it. "Green shutters," he said. She nodded. She said, "I'd stay out of that crawl space. Don't even look at the hatch if you can help it." Jonas looked at her. He asked why. She shook her head slowly, not dismissively but carefully, the way people shake their heads when they have thought about how much to say and decided on less rather than more. She said, "Some things live close to the ground around here. They're not animals and they're not people. The best thing you can do is not invite a conversation." Jonas asked what that meant. She handed him his change and said, "It means what it means. Don't open the hatch." He drove back to the cabin and told Mara what the woman had said. They stood in the kitchen and looked at the hatch and did not say what they were both thinking. Then Jonas moved the large cooler from beside the back wall and set it directly over the hatch. It was a 60-quart cooler, mostly full of ice and food, and it weighed enough that moving it required both hands and some effort. He positioned it carefully, centered over the hatch, and they both looked at it for a moment and then went back to what they had been doing. They were on the porch when it happened. Both of them. Sitting in the 2 wooden chairs with what was left of the afternoon light coming through the trees, talking about nothing in particular. The easy conversation of two people who have been together long enough that silence is also conversation. They had been outside for maybe 40 minutes. When they came back in to start dinner, the cooler had moved. Not knocked over, not pushed aside, moved. Precisely 6 inches to the left of where Jonas had placed it, leaving the hatch fully exposed. The floor around it was undisturbed. The cooler's contents had not shifted. They could tell by the way the ice had settled. Something had moved the cooler the way you move a cooler when you are trying to be quiet about it. Deliberately, with control, without disturbing anything around it. The cabin had no other access to the crawlspace. No exterior hatch, no vent wide enough for anything larger than a rat. No window in the crawlspace. No way in or out that either of them could find when they looked. They slept that night with every light in the cabin burning. Jonas sat in the chair closest to the kitchen and did not sleep until after 3. Mara slept in short stretches, waking at every small sound, which in an old cabin in the woods is a considerable number of sounds. Around 3 in the morning, the smell came back, stronger than it had been either previous night, sweet and wrong and present throughout the main room rather than concentrated near the vent. It was strong enough that Jonas stood up and went to the window and opened it despite the cold. And then it stopped. Not faded, stopped. Between one breath and the next, it was simply gone, and the air coming through the open window was cold and clean, and smelled of nothing except pine and wet soil. Jonas stood at the window for a while, and then closed it and sat back down. The cabin was quiet for the rest of the night. In the morning, they left before the sun was fully up. Mara wrote the last entry in the guest register before they closed the door. She wrote, "The hatch moved twice. We're not leaving a full note." She signed it with the date and nothing else, and she took a photograph of the entry before she put the register back on the shelf, and then they locked the door and put the key back under the rock and drove down the 1-lane gravel road without looking back. They did not contact Gerald. The listing for that cabin disappeared from the co-workers' recommended group about 3 months after Mara and Jonas came home. The co-worker asked Gerald about it, and he said he was taking a break from rentals for a while. He did not give a reason. The co-worker said he sounded tired, the particular tired of someone who has been managing something for a long time and has decided to stop. Mara still has the photograph of the register entry on her phone. She has not deleted it, though she is not sure why she keeps it. She does not read about crawl spaces in a casual way anymore. Not in the way most people read about ordinary things, without registering them as anything other than ordinary. The word catches her attention now, every time. The way a word catches your attention when it has been changed for you by experience into something other than what it used to mean. The next account comes from a retired park ranger who worked a national forest district in West Virginia. It was posted anonymously by a former colleague on a closed forum for current and former federal land management employees. The colleague added a note at the top that said the ranger had given her permission to share it, with details changed, on the condition that the part about the radio log be included exactly as it happened. That was the condition, the radio log. Bev Callahan had worked the same National Forest District in West Virginia for 19 years before she retired, and in that time she had done the backcountry patrol cabin rotation so many times that the overnight stays had become almost meditative. A cot, a propane heater, a battery lantern, a radio, a logbook, a first aid kit, and 12 hours of quiet. She had done it in every season, in every kind of weather the district produced, and she had never once found it frightening. Lonely sometimes. Cold often. Frightening never. The patrol cabin she was assigned to that October was a small structure at the end of a decommissioned service road, 4 miles from the nearest trailhead and 8 miles from the district station. It had been built in the 70s for fire lookout support and had been repurposed for backcountry patrol use sometime in the 90s. It had no running water and no electricity. It smelled of old canvas and propane, and the particular dry staleness of a small enclosed space that gets used infrequently and aired out rarely. Bev had stayed in it maybe 15 times over the years. She knew its sounds, the way the metal roof ticked when the temperature dropped, the way the door frame whistled slightly in a north wind, the way the propane heater made a low, rhythmic sound like breathing when it first came on. She arrived late on a Tuesday afternoon, signed into the trail register at the door box, logged her 6 p.m. radio check-in with the district station. Weather clear, trail conditions good, no unusual activity to report. She ate a protein bar and checked the day's trail log. 3 hikers had signed in that morning. All 3 had signed out by 4. She heated water for tea on the propane burner and changed into dry socks, and sat on the cot with a field guide to Appalachian flora that she had been slowly working through for 2 years. She turned the radio down to a low volume, low enough to hear a transmission, but not so loud it would keep her awake, and she settled in. At 11:44 p.m., the radio produced a call. She was not fully asleep, she rarely was in the first hour after lying down, and the call brought her upright immediately. She reached for the radio and checked the channel. She was on the correct district frequency. The call was using a unit designation she had never heard anyone use in 19 years on this district. She sat with the radio in her hand and listened to it again. The unit designation was a trail sector code from the old system, the one that had been restructured and renumbered in 2017 when the district boundaries were redrawn. The code referred to a trail sector that no longer existed under that designation, a section of trail on the eastern edge of the district that had been reassigned to a different management zone and renumbered. Nobody on the current staff used the old codes. Nobody should have been using that frequency with that designation. She logged it. She noted the time, the frequency, the unit designation, and the fact that the transmission had been brief and unclear. She switched to the backup frequency and noted the switch in the logbook. She reported a possible frequency anomaly to the duty officer at the station, got an acknowledgement, and lay back down. The call came back on the backup frequency. Same unit designation, same voice, clearer this time, the transmission stronger, as if the source had moved closer, or the atmospheric conditions had shifted in a way that improved reception. The voice was asking for a location check on a trail the caller referred to by name. An old trail name, not the current designation, the name the trail had carried before the 2017 restructure. A trail that was currently closed. It had been closed after a significant washout 2 years ago, and the repair work had never been funded. There were closure signs at both trailheads, and the trail was not on the current district map for public use. No authorized personnel were on that trail. No search and rescue operation was active in that sector. There was no reason for anyone to be on that trail at 11:44 on a Tuesday night in October, and there was certainly no reason for anyone to be using a retired unit designation on a district frequency to ask about it. The voice sounded strained, not panicked. Strained in the way that someone sounds after they have been moving for a long time and are tired and need something confirmed. It was asking for a location check the way you ask for a location check when you are not entirely sure where you are and need someone to tell you. Bev did not respond. Her training was specific about anomalous transmissions. Log the time, note the content, report to the duty officer, do not engage until the source is verified. She had followed that protocol more times than she could count, mostly for equipment malfunctions and occasionally for civilians who had gotten hold of scanner equipment and were playing around with frequencies. She followed it now. She picked up the logbook and wrote down the content of the transmission as precisely as she could: the trail name, the unit designation, the nature of the request. She would say later that the reason she hesitated was not fear. She was clear about that. It was professionalism. You verify before you respond. That was her training, and her training had been correct in every situation she had previously encountered, and she had no reason in the moment to believe this situation was different. That hesitation, that adherence to protocol, is the only reason she is completely certain of what she heard on the third transmission. Because she was fully alert, fully professional, listening carefully and deliberately, and what she heard clearly. The voice said a name, not the name of a current staff member, not a hiker, not a visitor, not anyone who had any current reason to be on that frequency. The voice said the name of a ranger who had been assigned to this district until March of 2016, when she had gone missing during a solo patrol on the Eastern Trail sector, the same sector the old unit designation referred to, the same trail that was now closed. An official search had run for 11 days. 2 additional search teams had been brought in from neighboring districts. The trail had been walked and gridded and walked again. She had not been found. The search had been formally suspended after the 11th day, and the case had remained open but inactive since then. Bev had known her. They had worked the same district for 2 years, overlapping before the missing ranger had been assigned to the eastern sector. They had done patrol cabin rotations at the same station. Bev knew her voice, and she knew the cadence of her name as it was used on the radio, the specific way the syllables were arranged in a professional context versus a casual one. The voice on the radio was not using the missing ranger's voice. It was asking about her. It was asking base whether she had checked in, using her name and her old unit designation, asking for confirmation that she had logged her location, asking the way you ask when you are coordinating a patrol and someone is overdue and you are not yet alarmed, but you are beginning to be. No one had used that ranger's name on this frequency in 6 years. Bev sat on the cot with the radio in both hands, and she did not respond, and she did not move for a long moment. Then she keyed the main frequency and reached the duty officer at the station. She reported the transmissions. She gave the unit designation, the trail name, and the fact that a missing person's name had been used in the third call. She kept her voice level. The duty officer was quiet for a moment on the other end. Then he said, "That unit designation is from the old system. Don't engage with it. Log the time and don't respond. We've had this before." Bev asked what he meant by before. The duty officer said, "Not on the radio, Bev. Log it and don't respond." She logged it. She sat with the logbook open on her knee, and she wrote down the duty officer's exact words alongside the transmission record, and she put the time beside each entry, and she sat in the patrol cabin in the dark with the propane heater breathing beside her, and the battery lantern casting its small circle of light, and she thought about what before meant in that context. The fourth call came at 1:00 in the morning, the fifth at 2:33. Both on the backup frequency, same unit designation, same voice, same trail name. At 2:33 there was something in the background of the transmission that she had not heard in the earlier calls, a sound behind the voice, faint enough that she might have missed it if she had not been listening with the particular quality of attention that the previous calls had produced in her. Footsteps on gravel, or something close enough to footsteps on gravel that the distinction did not matter. A slow, rhythmic sound, weight on loose stone, moving at the pace of someone walking without urgency. At 3:11 in the morning, something walked past the patrol cabin door. She heard it on the gravel path outside, the same slow rhythm she had heard in the background of the 2:33 transmission, steady and unhurried. It came from the direction of the service road and moved toward the eastern trail, toward the closure signs at the trailhead 200 yards from the cabin. It did not stop at the cabin. It did not pause or slow or approach the door. It simply moved past on the gravel path end to end, and the sound of it diminished as it moved away toward the closed trail and then was gone. Bev sat on the cot with her hand on the radio and did not open the door. She logged 311 in the logbook with the notation, audible footfall on gravel path, single pass, direction service road to eastern trailhead. No visual confirmation, did not engage. She wrote it in the same measured handwriting she had used for every other entry in 19 years of patrol logs. Then she sat with the logbook on her knee until the sky outside the cabin's small window went from black to the particular dark blue that comes before gray. And then she got up and made tea and waited for first light. In the morning, she checked the trail register at the door box. No new entries. The 3 hikers from the previous day had signed out. No one had signed in during the night. She walked the gravel path from the cabin to the eastern trailhead. The path had a soft shoulder on the western side where the gravel met a strip of bare soil, and the soil showed disturbance. Not clear boot prints, the gravel itself had no impressions, and the soil was soft enough that the edges of whatever marks were there had blurred slightly in the overnight dampness. But something had moved along that path. The disturbance in the soft shoulder was consistent with a walking pattern, evenly spaced, moving in one direction. The prints, such as they were not boot prints. They were bare, or they were consistent with bare feet, the shape of them, narrower at the heel, wider at the ball, 5 toe impressions visible in the clearest mark, consistent with an unshod human foot rather than any animal track she could identify. They led from the cabin toward the eastern trailhead. They did not return. She radioed the station and requested a welfare check on the closed eastern trail before her shift ended. 2 rangers from the day crew walked the first half-mile of the trail and found nothing to indicate another person had been there. No gear, no sign of passage, no disturbance of the closure signs. Nothing except one object, found hanging from a branch at eye level approximately a quarter-mile in, placed in the open where it would be visible to anyone walking the trail. A whistle, the kind that rangers carry on patrol. A short plastic safety whistle on a woven nylon lanyard. The lanyard was a particular shade of orange that Bev recognized, the color used on the lanyards issued to district staff in 2014, before the district changed to a different supplier. She had carried one herself for 3 years before the changeover. The whistle was logged and turned in at the station. The duty officer signed off on the anomaly report without adding any explanation. The radio log for that night showed 3 anomalous transmissions in the backup frequency column, the unit designation recorded beside each one. There was a blank line in the log at 3:11, the time she had noted the footsteps, because 3:11 was not a scheduled check-in time, and the only thing she had to record there was something she was not sure how to categorize. She left it blank. She requested a transfer to a different district the following spring, and the transfer was approved. The duty officer retired the same year. Bev asked him once, in the parking lot after his retirement gathering, what he had meant by before, what he had meant when he said they had experienced this before. He looked at his keys for a moment and then he said, "Equipment does strange things at altitude. Frequencies behave in ways that are hard to account for. You learn not to follow up." Then he said goodbye and got in his car. The closed Eastern Trail was never reopened. The official reason given was ongoing funding constraints for trail repair. Bev does not know if that is the only reason. The whistle is in an evidence box at the district station. It has been there for several years. Nobody checked it for a name, Rangers sometimes write their names inside the lanyard loop with a permanent marker, in the space where the nylon folds over itself, because lanyards get mixed up in the gear room and a name prevents confusion. Nobody looked inside the lanyard loop of the whistle in the evidence box. Nobody looked. She thought about the whistle for a long time after she transferred districts. Not obsessively. Bev Callahan was not built for obsession. 19 years of federal land management had seen to that. But persistently, the way a detail persists when it does not have a category to go into. She had a system for professional experience, the same way Dale Carver had a system, the same way anyone who works a practical job in difficult terrain develops a system. You categorize what you encounter and you move forward. The whistle did not categorize. It was the placement that bothered her most, not the object itself. A whistle on a trail was not inherently strange. Hikers dropped gear, gear got caught in branches. There were ordinary explanations for a whistle on a branch. It was the placement, eye level, centered on the trail, in the open, where it would be seen. Not dropped, not snagged, placed. With the same deliberate quality she associated with someone who wanted to be sure a thing was found. She had seen that quality of placement before, in her professional life, in contexts she did not like to think about at the same time as she thought about the whistle. She did not write that connection down anywhere. She kept it where she kept the other things that did not categorize. Her former colleague, the one who eventually posted the account, asked her once whether she had gone back to check the lanyard, whether she had driven back to the district station, found the evidence box, looked inside the fold of nylon for a name written in permanent marker. Bev said no. Her colleague asked why not. Bev thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "Because if there's no name, that doesn't prove anything. And if there is a name, I don't know what I do with that." Her colleague posted the account shortly after that conversation, with Bev's permission and with the details changed as agreed. She included the part about the radio log because Bev had asked her to, and she included the part about the whistle because she thought it was the detail that mattered most. The detail that made the rest of it more than a story about equipment malfunction and a strange night in a patrol cabin. The radio log exists. The anomaly report exists, signed by the duty officer who told Bev not to follow up and who retired the following spring, and who is no longer reachable for comment. The blank line at 311 exists, in Bev's handwriting, in a logbook that is filed at the district station in a cabinet with 19 years of other patrol logs. The whistle exists, in an evidence box that nobody has opened in several years. The closed Eastern Trail still has closure signs at both trailheads. They are weathered now, sun-faded, the orange color gone to a pale salmon. The trail behind them is overgrown. The funding for repair has not materialized. Whether that is the only reason the trail remains closed, Bev cannot say, and she has said as much to the one person she has discussed it with fully. She does not work that district anymore. She does not do overnight patrol cabin rotations at all, which is one of the reasons she retired when she did. The rotation was a condition of the position, and she was not willing to do the rotation anymore. And rather than explain why she was not willing, she retired. She says this plainly, without drama. She had 19 good years, and she had one night she does not fully understand, and she made a practical decision based on both of those things. The one thing she will say directly, when asked, is this: whatever was on that frequency knew the trail by its old name. Not the current designation, not the number it carried after the 2017 restructure, but the name it had before, the name that had been in use when the missing ranger was assigned to that sector, the name she would have known and used. A person using outdated equipment and an old unit code might use an old trail name out of habit or ignorance. but the name had been retired at the same time the unit code had been retired, in the same restructure, and the connection between the two was specific enough that knowing one without knowing the other was unlikely. Whatever was on that frequency knew the old system, knew it from the inside. Bev does not speculate about what that means. She states it as a fact, and she leaves it where it is. The duty officer's last day at the station was a Friday in April, and his colleagues had put together a small gathering in the break room. Cake, coffee, a framed photograph of the district map signed by the current staff. Bev had driven back to attend 2 hours each way, because she thought she owed him that, and because she wanted the chance to ask her question in person rather than on the phone. She waited until the gathering wound down and most people had drifted back to their desks, and she caught him in the parking lot before he reached his car. She asked him what before meant. He stood with his keys in his hand and looked at the keys rather than at her for a moment. Then, he said, equipment does strange things at altitude, and frequencies behave in ways that are hard to account for, and you learn not to follow up. She waited to see if there was more. There was not. He said goodbye and got in his car and drove out of the parking lot, and she stood there for a moment and then got in her own car and drove the 2 hours home. She has not spoken to him since. She does not know his current contact information and has not looked for it. She is not sure what she would ask him that she has not already asked. What she knows is this: the transmissions happened, the footsteps happened, the print in the soft shoulder of the gravel path happened, the whistle on the branch happened, and somewhere in an evidence box in a district station in West Virginia, there is a nylon lanyard folded over on itself with a space inside the fold where someone may or may not have written a name. She knows all of that. She has organized it as carefully as she can, and it still does not fit the system she built in 19 years of practical work in difficult terrain. She keeps a radio in her house, a basic handheld, the same model she used on patrol. She tells people it is a habit, that people who work remote land long enough like having a radio nearby, that it is the same reason some people keep a compass on the kitchen counter or a first aid kit in the car. She says it is just a habit. She keeps it on at night. She keeps it on the backup frequency, the one she switched to on that October night in the patrol cabin, the one she switched to because the main frequency had produced something she could not account for. She keeps it there and she keeps the volume low, and she has not, in the years since she transferred and then retired, heard anything on it that she could not account for. She checks it before she goes to sleep. Every night, just the volume, just the frequency, just to confirm that both are where she left them. Just a habit. The next account comes from a man in his early 50s who drove a cargo van through southwestern Virginia on a favor for his cousin. He shared it with his brother, and his brother posted it to a small regional forum for people who drive mountain roads professionally. His brother added a note at the top. Wayne told me this the night he got home. He was not the kind of man who told stories like this. That's why I'm posting it. Wayne was 53 and had been driving for most of his working life. Not long-haul trucking exactly, but the kind of driving that long-haul truckers recognize. Runs that other people would not take, routes that required knowledge of secondary roads, the kind of work that rewards a person who is comfortable in a vehicle alone for long stretches and who can read a road the way some people read a room. He knew what a bad road felt like before it became a problem. He knew what mountain fog did to headlights at different elevations. He was not a man who got lost, and he was not a man who got rattled. He was doing a favor for his cousin, a moving job that his cousin could not do himself, driving a rented cargo van from a storage unit in southwest Virginia to a house in eastern Tennessee. It was a straightforward run on paper. The interstate route would have taken 3.5 hours. His GPS, which he had updated 2 weeks earlier, routed him off the interstate midway through the trip due to a reported closure, and sent him onto a state highway that connected through a series of county roads through the mountain hollows between the two states. He had driven mountain county roads before. He was not concerned. He stopped at a gas station at the top of a long hollow where the state highway split off into the county road system. It was a small station, 2 pumps, a low building with a handwritten sign advertising night crawlers and bottled water, the kind of place that exists because it is the last place before somewhere remote, rather than because anyone planned it. He topped off the van and went inside. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, heavy-set, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a manner that was not unfriendly but not interested in small talk. He paid for the gas and bought a foam cup of coffee from the machine on the counter, the kind of coffee that is reliably bad in a reliable way, and he asked whether the county road through the hollow was passable for a full-size cargo van. She said it was passable. Then she said, "Don't stop for anyone on that road. Don't flash your lights at anybody standing near the curves. And if you see someone who looks lost, just drive." Wayne thanked her and assumed she meant what such warnings usually mean on rural roads at dusk, that there were sometimes people with car trouble, sometimes people who were not entirely stable, and that it was better for a solo driver in a cargo van to keep moving than to get involved in something that was not his business. It was practical advice. He had heard versions of it before on other rural routes. He pulled out of the gas station and turned onto the county road. The hollow dropped away on both sides almost immediately. Steep wooded slopes rising on the left and right with the road running along the bottom. One lane of old asphalt with a center line that had faded to almost nothing. The light was going. The tree canopy held onto the dusk longer than the open sky above, and by the time he had driven a mile into the hollow, it felt later than it was. The first bend in the road was a long left-hand curve around a limestone bluff. Wayne slowed for it, came through it, and in the headlights on the far side of the curve he saw a man standing on the right shoulder of the road. The man was facing away from the road, toward the ditch on the right side, standing with his back to the van. He was wearing a dark canvas jacket and work pants, and he was completely still, not looking at the van, not turning toward the headlights, not indicating in any way that he was aware of a vehicle approaching from behind. Just standing at the shoulder facing the ditch, the way you stand when you're looking at something. Wayne slowed slightly. The man did not turn. He did not raise a hand or move his head or change his posture in any way. There was no vehicle visible on either side of the road. Wayne continued past him, watching in the side mirror until the curve took the man out of view. He picked the most reasonable explanation. Someone who had pulled over and gotten out to walk around. Someone who had broken down farther up the road and was walking back. Someone who had stopped to check the ditch for something. And he kept driving. The second bend was half a mile farther. Another left-hand curve, a similar radius, a similar limestone bluff on the inside. Wayne came around it, and the headlights showed the right shoulder of the road beyond the curve. The same man, same jacket, same posture. Facing the ditch, completely still, back to the road. Wayne slowed and looked hard. Same canvas jacket, same work pants, same build, same complete and total stillness. No car on either side of the road. He looked in the rearview mirror. The first bend was just visible in the distance, and the shoulder where the man had been standing was empty. He had not heard any vehicle pass him. The road behind him had been silent. There was no way a man on foot had covered half a mile of hollow road in the time it had taken Wayne to drive that same distance. He did not stop. He drove past the man on the second bend and watched him in the rearview mirror until the road curved away, and the man did not turn, did not move, did not change. Just stood there looking at whatever was in the ditch. Wayne put both hands on the wheel and drove. The third bend was another quarter-mile ahead, the road curving right this time around a stand of old hemlock that pressed close to the shoulder on both sides. Wayne came around it with his foot already light on the accelerator, already slowing before his headlights had fully swept the far side of the curve, because some part of him had already decided what he was going to see. The same man, same jacket, same posture, facing the ditch, back to the road, completely still. Wayne did not slow down this time. He held his speed through the curve and past the figure and kept his eyes on the road ahead rather than on the man at the shoulder. And he watched the rearview mirror in his peripheral vision until the road straightened and the third bend was behind him. The man on the third bend did not turn, did not move, did not acknowledge the van passing 6 feet from where he stood. Wayne drove. The road straightened after the third bend, or it should have straightened. According to the route his GPS had shown him before he lost signal in the hollow, the 3 bends were the technical section of the county road, and after them the road ran fairly level and direct to the hollow's exit where it rejoined the state highway. That was what the map showed. What the road did was continue. It kept going. The hollow kept narrowing. The tree canopy kept pressing closer overhead, and the exit that should have appeared did not appear. Wayne checked the GPS. The screen showed him on the correct road, the blue line of his position moving steadily toward the marked exit. But the exit was not there. He drove another mile, and the exit was not there. He drove what felt like another mile after that, and the exit was not there. He looked at the clock on the van's dash and looked at his sense of how long he had been in the hollow, and the two things did not agree with each other, or with the distance the map had shown. He did not stop. The road was too narrow to stop safely, no shoulder wide enough for a cargo van, no turnaround visible, no passing place. He drove forward because forward was the only option the road offered. The hollow exit came up suddenly, the tree canopy pulling back, the road widening as it rejoined the state highway, the sky opening above him with the last of the dusk still in it. He came out of the hollow and drove another 2 miles to the first town and pulled into the parking lot of a diner and sat in the van for a few minutes with the engine running. He went inside and ordered coffee and a sandwich and sat at the counter. There were 3 other people in the diner, an older couple in a booth and a man about Wayne's age at the far end of the counter. The man at the counter had the look of someone who lived nearby and ate here regularly, the particular ease of a person in a place where they are known. After a few minutes, the man looked over at Wayne and asked where he was coming from. Wayne said he had come through the hollow on the county road. The man set down his coffee cup. He looked at Wayne with an expression that was not surprise, and was not alarm, and was not quite either of those things but contained elements of both. He said, "How many times did you see him?" Wayne looked at him. He said, 3. The man nodded slowly. He said, 3 means it noticed you. 2 just means you came through. 3 means it was paying attention. Wayne asked what it was. The man looked at the counter in front of him for a moment. Then he said, "Nobody knows what's in that ditch. Locals don't stop to find out." Wayne asked how the man knew he had seen anyone at all. He had not described what had happened. He had said he came through the hollow and nothing else. The man looked at him and said, "Because you came in here and sat down instead of keeping driving. That's how I know." Wayne did not have an answer for that. He drank his coffee and ate half his sandwich, and then he thought about the distance. He had checked his odometer at the gas station at the top of the hollow, a habit from years of driving, tracking mileage against fuel. He checked it now against what he had paid for at the station. The county road through the hollow was 4.2 miles, according to the county map, which he confirmed later on his phone when he had signal again. His odometer showed he had driven 11 miles between the gas station and the diner. He photographed the odometer reading before he started the van. He still had the photograph from the gas station that he had taken for mileage records. The numbers were clear. The county road was 4.2 miles. His van had driven 11. The GPS track, which he checked later that evening when he had reliable signal, showed the correct 4.2 miles. The route log on the GPS matched the county map. His odometer did not match either of them, and his odometer had been accurate on every other stretch of road that day, verified by fuel consumption. He sat in the diner parking lot for a while after he paid and thought about the woman at the gas station at the top of the hollow. She had said, "Do not flash your lights at anybody standing near the curves." He had not flashed his lights. He had been careful about that. Careful enough to register the instruction and follow it even as he was making sense of what he was seeing. But he had slowed. At the first bend and again at the second bend he had slowed, and slowing changes what headlights do on a curve. The angle of the beam shifts when the van decelerates. The light drops lower and sweeps wider, and illuminates a different section of the ditch than it would at normal speed. He had illuminated the ditch 3 times, from 3 different angles, at 3 different bends, with the beam dropping to the bottom of the ditch each time he slowed. He had done it without meaning to, without understanding that slowing was the equivalent of flashing. He had done exactly what the woman had told him not to do, just not in the way she had described it, and whatever was in that ditch had been illuminated 3 times by his headlights, and had stood at the shoulder 3 times in response. He did not know what it had seen when the light reached it. He did not know what looking at it from the road 3 times meant to it, or what 3 meant in any terms beyond what the man at the counter had told him. 3 means it noticed you. 3 means it was paying attention. He drove to the interstate without stopping and took the interstate the rest of the way, 4 hours out of his route, arriving at his cousin's place in eastern Tennessee well after midnight. He did not turn the radio on for the rest of the drive. He would tell his brother later that the silence had felt necessary, like a condition he needed to maintain, like sound would constitute another form of signal he did not want to send. He told his brother the story that same night, sitting at his brother's kitchen table with a cup of coffee neither of them was drinking. His brother listened without interrupting, which was unusual for his brother. When Wayne finished, his brother asked if he was going to report it. Wayne said, "Report what?" A man standing on a road shoulder is not a crime. An odometer reading that does not match a GPS track is not a crime. A man in a diner who asks too many questions before being told anything is not a crime. There was nothing to report that would not sound like something other than what it was. Wayne does not take county road shortcuts anymore. Not in that part of Virginia, not in any part of Appalachia. Not when the road is single lane and the hollow is deep and the GPS wants to route him off the interstate for reasons it does not explain. He stays on the numbered roads now. He pays the extra time. The photograph of the odometer is on his phone. He does not look at it often, and he has not deleted it. His brother asked him once why he kept it, and Wayne said he was not sure, except that it was the one piece of the experience that could not be explained away by someone who had not been there. A story about a man at a road shoulder could be a coincidence, could be 2 men who looked alike, could be a trick of bad light on a curved road at dusk. The odometer could not be a trick of light. The odometer was 11 miles on a 4-mile road, and that was a fact. And he kept the photograph because facts, in his experience, were worth keeping, even when you did not know what to do with them yet. He told his brother, "I don't know what was in that ditch. I know that whatever was in it was looking at it. 3 times. All 3 times at the same angle, the same position, the same complete stillness. That's not someone who pulled over. That's not someone lost. That's something with a reason to be exactly there, doing exactly that, and it's been doing it long enough that the people in that county know not to slow down on the curves. His brother posted the account the following week. He said in his note at the top that Wayne was not the kind of man who told stories like this. He said that was the main reason he was posting it. Because the kind of man Wayne was mattered to the story, and the story mattered to him, and he thought other people who drove mountain roads should know that the Hollow Road existed and what it contained. The Hollow Road is still there. It is still on the GPS as a valid route. It is still 4.2 miles according to the county map. Wayne does not know how many people have driven it since him. He does not know how many of them slowed at the curves. He does not know how many of them saw the figure once and kept driving and never saw it again. And he does not know how many of them slowed a second time and a third time and came out the other end of the hollow with an odometer that did not agree with the map and a silence in the cab of their vehicle that felt like something they owed. The next account is a family story. It comes from a woman in her 60s in eastern Tennessee whose father told it to her near the end of his life. She submitted it as a written account to a small regional folklore newsletter with the note, "This happened to my father in 1987, and I believe him completely. I am sharing it because he asked me to, and because of what I found in the county records afterward." Harold Marsh had driven that mountain road in eastern Tennessee twice a week for 11 years, by the time October of 1987 came around. He knew it the way you know a road when you have driven it in every season and every kind of weather it produces. Not just the curves and the grades, but the way the light moves through the trees at different times of day, the way the fog sits in the hollows in early morning, the way the asphalt changes color when it is about to ice. He was a construction foreman, practical and observant in the way that people who manage large physical projects become practical and observant. And he had the particular confidence of a man who knows his territory well enough that surprises in it are rare. He had a piece of family land up that road, a small cabin that his father had built in the 50s on a few acres of hardwood forest on the east-facing slope of the ridge, accessible by a short gravel drive that left the main road about 4 miles from the bottom of the mountain. Harold went up every few weeks to check on it, more often in fall when the weather could do things to an old structure quickly. That October evening, he had gone up after a week of rain to check the roof and the woodpile, and to see whether the tree he had noticed leaning toward the access road had come down yet. It had. He spent 20 minutes cutting the smaller branches back enough to clear the drive, made a note to come back with the chainsaw for the main trunk, checked the roof, which was fine, checked the woodpile, which was adequate, locked the cabin, and drove back down the mountain in the last of the daylight. He knew the curve. He had driven it 1,000 times. A long, right-hand curve about a mile from where the mountain road met the main county road at the bottom, the inside of the curve banked by a low limestone outcrop, and the outside dropping away into a shallow drainage ditch before the slope continued down through the second-growth timber. He had driven that curve in the dark, and in rain, and in fog, and in every combination of those conditions. It held no particular interest for him beyond the need to slow appropriately and hold his lane. He came around it in the last of the October light, and there was a man standing on the left shoulder. Not on the right, not in the road, but on the left shoulder between the road edge and the drainage ditch, standing facing Harold's truck as it came around the curve. Not pressed against the outcrop, not crouched, not in any posture that suggested alarm or distress. Just standing there, upright and still, in the casual way of someone waiting for something they are confident will arrive. Harold slowed. He looked at the man as he passed. Older, he thought, maybe mid-60s, wearing a dark jacket, canvas or wool, he could not tell in that light. and denim pants. No vehicle visible on either side of the road. No equipment, no bag, nothing in his hands. The man's expression was visible for the moment. Harold's headlights were fully on him, and it was not an expression Harold could easily read, but it was not distress and it was not aggression. It was something closer to recognition. The man raised his hand as Harold passed, not urgently, the way neighbors wave from a driveway when they recognize a car. Harold raised his hand back and drove on. He thought about it for the rest of the drive down the mountain, which took about 8 minutes. He ran through the people he knew who lived on or near that road. It was not a densely populated stretch. A few families, some of them names he knew only by reputation, and he could not place the man. Could not connect the face, in the brief time he had seen it in moving headlights, to any person he could name. He decided he had half recognized someone he had seen at a distance before, a neighbor he had never been properly introduced to, and that the man had recognized Harold's truck if not Harold himself, and had waved for that reason. It was a complete and reasonable explanation. Harold accepted it, and did not think about the man again for 3 weeks. The local paper in that county came out on Thursdays, 4 pages, mostly local government business and school sports, and the occasional feature on something of historical interest. Harold read it at the kitchen table on Thursday evenings while his wife finished dinner, a habit that went back to when they had moved to the county in the early 70s. 3 weeks after the October evening on the mountain road, the paper ran a feature on the county's missing persons cases. A slow news week, Harold's daughter assumed later, the kind of week when a small paper returns to unsolved history for want of current events. The feature included photographs, old ones, black and white, pulled from county records and family submissions. Harold was reading it with half his attention, the way you read a local paper when you already know most of the people and places in it. And then he turned to the second page, and his attention stopped being half. One of the photographs showed the curve on the mountain road. He recognized it immediately, the limestone outcrop on the inside, the drainage ditch on the outside, the angle of the slope beyond. The photograph had been taken from the road, looking toward the spot where a man had been standing when Harold drove past. It had been taken in 1975 as part of a missing persons investigation, the caption said, to document the area where a man had last been seen. The man in the photograph was standing at the left shoulder of the road, between the road edge and the drainage ditch, in the spot where Harold had seen a man standing 3 weeks earlier. He was wearing a dark jacket and denim pants. He was standing in the same position, upright, still, facing the camera the way he had faced Harold's headlights. The photograph had been taken 11 years before Harold drove past that curve on that October evening. Harold looked at the photograph for a long time. He read the caption. The man had vanished in October of 1974. The search had been conducted over 2 weeks and had found nothing. The case was listed as unresolved. The photograph was included to show where he had last been seen, taken during the search as documentation. Harold put the paper down. He picked it up again and looked at the photograph again. He put it down again. He did not tell his wife. He did not tell anyone. He cut out the article carefully with the kitchen scissors, folded it, and put it in the drawer of his bedside table. And then he did not drive that mountain road again. He found a longer route to the family land, 20 minutes more each way, and he took it without explaining to his wife why he had changed his route, and she did not ask because she knew Harold well enough to understand that when he changed something without explanation, there was an explanation he was not ready to give. He drove the longer route for 32 years. He never went back to the original road in October. He went sometimes in other months, in winter or early spring, and he did not see the man on those drives. But October he did not drive that road, not once in the 32 years between 1987 and 2019, and he did not explain it until near the end of his life when he finally told his daughter. His daughter was 58 when he told her. He was 76 and in the last year of his life, and he told it the way people tell things they have been holding for a long time, carefully, with close attention to the details he was certain of and clear acknowledgement of the ones he was not. He said, "The man waved first." That was the part he had come back to most often over the years. Not his own wave back, which had been automatic, a social reflex on a road where you wave at people you pass, but the fact that the man had waved first, that the man had raised his hand before Harold's hand moved, as if he recognized Harold, as if they had a prior acquaintance that Harold had no memory of. Harold had never met him. He was certain of that. His daughter went to the county records office after he told her. The county records office was a single room in the basement of the courthouse, staffed by a woman named Darlene, who had worked there for 23 years and who treated every request with the same careful, unhurried attention regardless of what was being asked for. Harold's daughter gave her the name from the newspaper article and the approximate date range, and Darlene went into the back and came out 20 minutes later with a manila folder that was thinner than Harold's daughter had expected. The missing persons file had been partially transferred to public record after the standard waiting period. Not all of it, some portions remained restricted, the investigation notes and the responding officer's assessments, but the witness interviews conducted in the weeks after the disappearance were accessible, and there were 4 of them. Harold's daughter read through all 4 at the small table Darlene provided near the window. 3 of the interviews were with people who had been in the area in the days before the man vanished. A neighbor who had seen his truck parked at the curve. A woman who had passed him on foot on the road 2 days before and had waved. A man who had spoken to him briefly at the gas station at the bottom of the mountain, who said he had seemed normal, unhurried, in good spirits. The 4th interview was with his wife. She had been interviewed 4 days after he disappeared, and the interview had been conducted at their home by 2 deputies. Harold's daughter read it twice, slowly, because the 3rd paragraph stopped her. The wife had reported that in the 3 weeks before her husband disappeared, he had mentioned seeing someone on the mountain road. Every evening, she said. The same curve, always at the same time, always the same person. A man standing at the left shoulder. Her husband had described him the same way Harold had described him to his daughter 30 years later. Older, dark jacket, denim pants, standing at the shoulder facing the road. Her husband had mentioned it casually at first, the way you mention a neighbor you keep seeing without being able to place. He had said, "I keep waving back. I don't know who he is. He's always there at the same time." He had been seeing the figure every evening for 3 weeks before he vanished. He disappeared on October 29th, 1974. Harold had seen the figure in October of 1987. 13 years later, same curve, same shoulder, same jacket, same posture, same wave. Harold's daughter sat at the small table near the window in the records room and read the wife's interview a 3rd time. Darlene was at her desk across the room and did not look up. Harold's daughter was aware of the particular quality of silence in a room full of old documents, the weight of accumulated record, and she sat in it for a while before she made her notes. She went looking for an older woman in the county after that. Not for any specific person, but for the kind of person who exists in every small rural county. Someone old enough to remember events from 50 years ago, not as history, but as lived experience. Someone whose knowledge of the local landscape and its behavior came from decades of direct contact rather than from records. She found her through a woman at the County Historical Society who said there was someone she should talk to, and gave her a name, and said to call ahead because the woman did not like unexpected visitors. The woman was 84 and had lived in that county her entire life. She received Harold's daughter at her kitchen table and listened to what she was describing without interrupting and without any visible surprise. When Harold's daughter finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment, looking at the kitchen window and the yard beyond it. Then she said, "There are places on mountain roads where things repeat. Not everything that repeats is what it looks like." She was quiet again for a moment. Then she said, "The old people said if something waves at you from the same place twice, don't wave back the third time." Harold's daughter thought about that. She said, "My father waved back once." The old woman looked at her steadily. She said, "Yes." Harold's daughter asked what had happened to the man who waved back for 3 weeks. The old woman looked at the window again. She said, "He stopped being seen on that road. That's all anybody knew." Harold's daughter drove home and sat in her car in her driveway for a while before she went inside. She thought about her father driving the longer route for 32 years without explaining why. She thought about him lying in his bed at 76 and finally telling her the story, the care he had taken with the details, the particular attention he had given to the fact that the man had waved first. She thought about the wife's interview in the manila folder, the third paragraph, the 3 weeks of evening sightings, the casual way the missing man had described it over dinner. "I keep waving back. I don't know who he is." She went to the county death records and looked for incidents on or near that curve. She was not sure what she was looking for. She found 2. One in October of 1951, a man who had gone off the road at that curve on a clear, dry night with no apparent mechanical failure, no skid marks, no explanation the investigating officer had been able to provide. One in October of 1974. The missing man, whose case was still technically open, still listed as unresolved, still without a body or a confirmed cause. Both in October. She stopped looking after that. She closed the browser and closed her notes and did not go back to the records office. She had found enough to understand why her father had changed his route, and finding more would not change what she understood, and she did not want to find more than she needed. Harold's account, as he gave it to his daughter in the last year of his life, ended simply. He said, "I waved once. I don't know if that was too many times or exactly the right number. I never found out what happened if you waved 3 times. I didn't want to." He said it without drama, the way a man states a practical conclusion he arrived at a long time ago and has not revisited since. He had made a calculation in 1987, an intuitive one, standing in front of a newspaper photograph at his kitchen table, and the calculation had produced one clear result: do not drive that road in October. He had honored that result for 32 years, and he was still alive, and had outlived the age at which the missing man had disappeared, and he considered that, quietly, to be a relevant data point. He never sold the cabin on the mountain. He left it to his daughter, along with the rest of the property, and she sold it the following year to a family from Knoxville who wanted a weekend place. She did not visit it in October before the sale. She handled the paperwork remotely and met the buyers at the property on a Wednesday afternoon in February. Bare trees and cold sunlight. The mountain road dry and gray and entirely ordinary looking in every direction. She still has the newspaper clipping in a drawer in her home. Not in a file, not in a frame, just in a drawer that she does not open often. She has not driven that road since her father told her what he saw on it, which is not a decision she made consciously, but a pattern she has noticed. She has tried to say clearly in the account she submitted what she knows and what she does not know, and where the line between them falls. She knows her father saw a man on that curve in October of 1987. She knows the newspaper photograph matched his description precisely, in detail and in position, and that the man in the photograph had disappeared 13 years before her father saw him. She knows the missing man's wife reported 3 weeks of sightings before he vanished. She knows there were 2 unexplained deaths on or near that curve, both in October. She knows her father drove a longer route for 32 years and never explained it until he was dying. And she knows that when he finally explained it, he was precise and careful and honest in the way he had always been precise and careful and honest about everything in his life. What she does not know is what was standing on that shoulder. Whether it was a thing that had been there since before 1951, or since 1974, or since some time she cannot reach with county records. Whether it is there now, in October, at that curve, waiting for someone to come around the limestone outcrop with their headlights and their automatic social reflexes. Whether the man who waved back for 3 weeks understood at some point what he was waving at, and whether understanding it changed anything. She does not drive that road. She wrote at the end of her account, "I don't know what it was. I know it had been waving at someone on that curve since at least 1974, maybe longer. I know my father waved back once and came home. I know the other man waved back for 3 weeks and then he wasn't there anymore. That is all I know, and it is enough." The clipping stays in the drawer. She does not look at it often. The last account is the one that took the longest to come forward. It was shared in writing, anonymously, by a man in his late 30s who described it as the last time he would write about what happened. He asked that the account be shared after a period of time had passed, and he asked that one thing be made clear at the beginning. He is not the person to be afraid for. The people to be afraid for are the ones who bought the cabin after him, the ones who may or may not have found the logbook, the ones who may or may not have read the last entry before they went to sleep. Marcus had been to the cabin once as a child, young enough that what remained of it was not memory exactly, but impression. A large dark room smelling of oil and cedar, a wood stove that seemed enormous, his great-uncle moving around the kitchen with the unhurried efficiency of a man in a space he had arranged exactly to his own satisfaction. He remembered the wood stove most clearly, the particular orange glow of it through the cast-iron vents, and the feeling of the place as somewhere that belonged entirely to someone else, ordered according to rules he did not yet know. He had been 7 or 8. He had not been back since. His great-uncle had died in February at 84, in the same county where he had lived his entire life. He had no children. His estate was modest: the cabin, the 40-acre parcel it sat on, a truck that was 20 years old and still ran, a bank account with enough in it to cover the property taxes for another few years. Marcos was the nearest living relative willing to make the trip, which was how he found himself driving from Columbus to eastern Kentucky on a Thursday morning in early April with a single overnight bag and a list of things the property attorney had told him to inventory. The attorney had described the cabin as being in good condition, considering its age and location. Marcus understood this to mean it was standing, and the roof was intact, and expectations should be calibrated accordingly. The logging road that accessed the property was unpaved and showed the damage of a wet winter. Soft shoulders, a washed-out section near the bottom that required careful navigation in his sedan. But it was passable, and the cabin at the end of it was indeed standing, the roof intact, the covered porch clear of debris. Someone had maintained it. His great-uncle had been 84 and had maintained a cabin on a remote logging road in eastern Kentucky, which told Marcus something about the kind of man he had been. The key the attorney had given him was on a plain key ring with a tag that read the property address in faded marker. It worked in the front door after some persuasion. The door had swollen in its frame, same as every other door Marcus had encountered in old structures in wet climates, and the cabin opened into the smell he half remembered from childhood. Oil and cedar and something older, the particular density of air in a space that has been heated by a wood stove for decades. A smell that is not unpleasant but is entirely specific to itself. His great-uncle had been a tidy man. The interior reflected that. Tools hung in order on the wall of the main room, largest to smallest, each on its own hook. Hunting licenses going back to 1987 were tacked in a row above the kitchen window, each one centered and level. A coffee mug sat on the kitchen table with a small amount of dried residue in the bottom, the last cup his great-uncle had made, and beside it a folded dish towel and a pen. Old photographs on the wall, mostly landscape, the ridge, the tree line at different seasons. One of a dog Marcus did not recognize sitting on the porch steps. His great-uncle himself appeared in almost none of them. He had been the kind of man who took photographs rather than the kind who appeared in them. The logbook was on the shelf above the wood stove. Marcus noticed it while he was getting the propane burner going for the soup he had brought in a thermos. A composition notebook, black and white cover, the kind that used to be standard in schools, sitting on the shelf with a quality of placement that suggested it was meant to be found there rather than stored there. His great-uncle had been a deliberate man. Things on shelves meant to be found were placed differently than things put away for safekeeping. Marcus took it down and set it on the kitchen table and opened it while the soup heated. The first entries were from the early 1990s. Hunting records, precise and detailed, dates, weather, trail conditions, animal sign, what he had seen and what he had not. His great-uncle wrote in a small, even hand that changed very little over 30 years, the handwriting of a person who had learned to write carefully and had never stopped. He recorded temperature in the morning and evening, noted changes in the creek level, described the behavior of animals he observed with the specificity of someone who had watched the same terrain for long enough that deviation from pattern was meaningful. It was a practical document, the record of a man who found the natural world legible and was committed to reading it accurately. Marcus read forward through the years slowly, heating his soup and eating it at the kitchen table without fully tasting it, moving through the decades of entries. The mid-90s, the early 2000s. The entries did not change much in character. Same careful handwriting, same practical observations, same attention to pattern and deviation. His great-uncle had been coming to this cabin for 30 years, and he had recorded all of it with the same steady attention. Then, about 8 years before his death, the entries began to change. Not dramatically at first. The hunting records and weather notes were still there, still regular, still written in the same careful hand. But alongside them, beginning in a specific October that Marcus could identify by the date, there were other entries. Shorter ones. Different in tone from everything that had come before. The first one read, "Heard it again tonight. Same corner of the ridge, same time as last week, did not go to the porch." Marcus read that entry twice. Then he read the next one, from 2 weeks later. It walked the perimeter again, closer than before. The dog would not go outside. And then, a month after that, "I have been leaving the porch light on. It stays outside the light, always outside the light." Marcus sat with the logbook open on the kitchen table, and the soup cooling beside it, and he looked at those entries for a while. His great-uncle had been 84 when he died, and the entries that concerned him were from 8 years before that, which meant his great-uncle had been 76 when he wrote them. Marcus thought about what it meant to be 76 and alone in a remote cabin in eastern Kentucky, coming every October out of habit and commitment, and the particular stubbornness of a person who has done something for 30 years and does not intend to stop. He thought about what isolation did to a mind over the course of a long night, what the sounds of a ridge at 2 in the morning became when there was no one else to hear them and confirm they were ordinary. He was not uncharitable toward his great-uncle. He loved him in the way you love a family member you did not know well, but whose character you respected. He chose the compassionate explanation and read on. He read backward from the unusual entries, looking for context, looking for the point at which the practical hunting record had begun to admit something else. The unusual entries started 8 years before his great-uncle's death and did not appear before that October. But then, reading further back, 15 years before his great-uncle's death, he found something that was not an unusual entry, but was different from the hunting records in a specific way. It read, "Talked to Hobart at the hardware store in town. He said his father used to say the same things about this parcel. Said it's been here since before the county was county. Said it doesn't leave. Said if you're quiet and you don't bother it, it won't bother you. Said the ones who get in trouble are the ones who leave and then come back." Marcus read that entry 3 times. He had left as a child. He had not been back in 30 years. He was back now. He sat at the kitchen table in the cabin that smelled of oil and cedar, and he thought about that sentence, "The ones who get in trouble are the ones who leave and then come back." And he thought about the fact that his great-uncle had written it down 15 years before the unusual entries began, had recorded it as information worth keeping, had continued to come to the cabin for 7 more years before whatever he was recording in those shorter entries had started. 7 years of uneventful visits after learning that information, and then something had changed, and the change had lasted until his great-uncle's death. Marcus turned to the last entries in the logbook. The final 10 pages covered the last 3 years of his great-uncle's life. The hunting records had stopped entirely by then. His great-uncle had not been well enough to hunt in those last years, had come to the cabin anyway, out of habit or attachment or something Marcus could not name. The entries in those final pages were all of the other kind. Short, precise, written in the same careful hand but with a different quality to them. The quality of a person recording things they need to have recorded rather than things they want to remember. It came closer to the porch light last night than it has before, did not cross it. 3 nights without a visit. Wondered if it had gone, it had not. The light agreement is holding. As long as the light holds, the agreement holds. And then the last entry, written 1 week before his great-uncle had driven himself to the hospital in town and been admitted and not come back. It came back. "I think it knows I'm leaving. I think it's been waiting for someone else to come." Marcus closed the logbook. He did not throw it away. He set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment, and then he went to the porch to get some air. And he stood on the covered porch in the April evening and looked at the tree line and the ridge beyond it, and the gap at the eastern corner where the slope came down, and the timber thinned before the logging road began. He stood there for a while, and then he went back inside. He would say later, to the friend he eventually told, that not throwing the logbook away was the first decision he regretted. Not staying the night. Not coming back to the cabin at all. Just not throwing away the logbook when he had the chance, in the daylight, before he understood what it was. He heated more water for coffee and sat back down at the kitchen table, and he did not open the logbook again that evening. He had read enough to understand the shape of what his great-uncle had been recording, and he was not yet ready to read the entries in the middle, the years between the first unusual one and the last. He left the logbook on the table and went to check the porch light, because the evening was coming down and the cabin was getting dark, and his great-uncle had left clear instructions about the porch light, even if those instructions were written in a composition notebook on a shelf rather than said aloud. He found the switch on the inside wall beside the front door and flipped it. Nothing happened. He flipped it again. Nothing. He looked at the porch through the window beside the door. The fixture was there, the old cast-iron fixture his great-uncle had probably installed 40 years ago, and the bulb in it was dark. Marcus went to find a replacement bulb. His great-uncle had been an organized man, and organized men who lived in remote cabins kept spare bulbs somewhere practical. He found them in the cabinet above the kitchen counter, a row of them in a small cardboard box, neatly labeled in his great-uncle's handwriting. He took one out and went to the porch and replaced the dead bulb and went back inside and flipped the switch. The porch light came on. From the eastern corner of the property, from the gap in the timber where the slope came down and the logging road began, Marcus heard something he would not describe in writing beyond these words. I heard it notice the light came back on. He stood at the front window for a long time after that. Not at the door. He did not open the door, but at the window beside it, looking out at the lit porch and the dark beyond the porch light's reach. The light did what porch lights do in forested places. It illuminated a circle and made everything outside that circle darker by contrast. The tree line was black. The gap at the eastern corner where the sound had come from was black. The gravel path from the porch to where the logging road began was lit for maybe 20 feet, and then it was black. He stood at the window until he was certain of something, and what he became certain of was this. He was not going to open the door tonight, and he was not going to turn the porch light off, and he was going to find out what he needed to know before he did anything else. He went back to the kitchen table and he opened the logbook. He read the middle entries, the ones he had skipped the first time. The years between the first unusual entry and the last. Oh, he read them slowly and in order, and what they described was a relationship. Not a hostile one, not exactly. His great-uncle had written about it with the detached precision he had used for everything else in 30 years of logbook entries, and what the entries described, read together and in sequence, was a negotiation that had reached a stable arrangement. The porch light was on. Whatever came to the property at night stayed outside the porch light. The arrangement held as long as both conditions were maintained. His great-uncle had discovered the arrangement by accident, or perhaps by intuition, in the first year of the unusual entries. He had written, "Left the light on all night for the first time. It did not come to the porch. We'll test again." He had tested it again and again. Over the following months, he had tested the boundaries of the arrangement with the same methodical care he had applied to 30 years of weather records. He had noted when the arrangement held and when it showed signs of pressure. He had noted that the pressure increased in October and decreased in other months. He had noted that the light needed to be on by dark to maintain the arrangement, that turning it on after dark produced a period of instability that resolved eventually, but required patience to sit through. He had maintained the arrangement for 7 years. He had come to the cabin every October for 7 years, turned the porch light on before dark, and whatever came to the property at night had stayed outside the light. That was the agreement. That was what his great-uncle had meant when he wrote the light agreement as holding. And then, his great-uncle had gotten too ill to come back, and the light had gone off. And Marcus had arrived in April with a key from the property attorney and no knowledge of any of this. And the bulb in the porch fixture had been dead when he flipped the switch. He did not know how long the bulb had been dead. He did not know how long the porch had been dark. He did not know what the period of darkness had meant to whatever came to the property at night, whether it had been understood as a violation of the arrangement or as an absence that created a vacancy. He closed the logbook and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what his great-uncle had written in that entry 15 years ago, the one about Hobart at the hardware store. It doesn't leave. The ones who get in trouble are the ones who leave and then come back. He had left as a child and come back as an adult, and the porch light had been dead when he arrived. He turned off every other light in the cabin, not because he wanted to be in the dark, but because he wanted to see clearly out the back window without the interior lights reflecting off the glass. He stood at the back window of the main room and looked toward the eastern corner of the property, toward the gap in the timber where the slope came down. There was something at the edge of the porch light's reach. He could not see it clearly. It was not a thing that resolved into a clear shape when he looked at it. It was more a quality of the dark at that specific location, a density that was different from the dark on either side of it. Not movement, not sound, just a presence at the exact boundary where the porch light ended and the dark of the tree line began. He stood at the back window and watched it, and it did not move, and it did not come closer, and it did not retreat. He watched it for 12 minutes. He knew the time because he checked his phone when he first noticed it, and checked it again when the porch bulb's warmth had built up enough that the light shifted very slightly, the way old incandescent bulbs do when they have been on long enough for the filament to reach full temperature. When the light shifted, the shape at the boundary moved, not toward the cabin, back. One step precisely, maintaining its position at the exact edge of the light's reach as the reach extended slightly with the warmer bulb. It understood the boundary. It was tracking the boundary in real time and maintaining its position relative to it, which meant it was not standing at a fixed point in the dark. It was standing at a specific relationship to the light, and it adjusted that relationship when the light changed. Marcus stood at the back window for a while longer. Then he went to the kitchen and made coffee, and sat at the table with the logbook and read the entry about Hobart again. Then he put on his jacket and drove down the logging road in the dark to where the road met the county road and continued into town. The hardware store opened at 7 in the morning. Marcus was in the parking lot at 6:45. When the lights came on inside, he went in and asked for Hobart. The man behind the counter was in his early 40s, lean and unhurried, with the particular manner of someone who has worked a small hardware store long enough to know that most people who come through the door know less about what they need than they think. He looked at Marcus for a moment and then said Hobart had been his grandfather, and his grandfather had been dead for 2 years. Marcus said he had found references to Hobart in his great-uncle's logbook. He said his great-uncle had spoken to Hobart about the property on the logging road, about something that Hobart's father had also known about. The man behind the counter listened to this without any visible surprise. He asked which parcel. Marcus described the location. The man nodded. He said, "My grandfather told my father and my father told me. It doesn't leave the property. It's been there since before anyone can remember. It's not dangerous as long as you don't interfere with the light." He paused. "The light is the agreement." Marcus asked what happened if the light went out. The man said, "You replace it. Fast as you can, that's the whole rule. Replace it and don't make a habit of letting it go out." Marcus asked how long the bulb had been dead before he arrived. The man said he did not know. He said it was not the kind of thing he kept track of on other people's properties. He said it was not his place to do that. Marcus drove back up the logging road with a bag of replacement bulbs on the passenger seat. He checked the porch light when he got back. Still on, still burning. He checked the eastern corner of the property in the morning light. The gap in the timber looked like a gap in the timber. The slope came down and the logging road began, and the trees stood the way trees stand, and there was nothing there that should not have been there. He went inside and read the entry his great-uncle had written 3 years before his death, the one he had not read the previous night because he had been reading in order, and the evening had overtaken him before he reached it. It read, "Tried to explain it to the property attorney. He looked at me like I was confused. I'm not confused. I've been tired for a long time, but I'm not confused. I've kept the light on for 30 years, and I don't know what happens when it stays off, and I don't want to find out. I hope whoever comes after me reads this before they go to sleep the first night. His great-uncle had known someone would come. He had known they would not be told, because the property attorney had made clear that he was not going to include logbook entries in estate documentation. And he had done the only thing he could do, which was leave the logbook on the shelf above the wood stove where it would be found on the first evening. In the place where a person goes when they are making coffee or heating soup, in the position that a deliberate man puts something when he needs it to be found by someone who does not know they need to find it. He had put it there for Marcus, or for whoever came, and Marcus had found it. And the question Marcus was left with was what to do with what he had found. He listed the property with the local real estate agent that afternoon. He told the agent he wanted to include a note in the listing materials, something from the property documentation. The agent asked what kind of note. Marcus said it was from the previous owner's logbook, a maintenance note about the porch light. The agent looked at him carefully and said she could not include personal documents in listing materials, that it was not standard practice, that buyers would receive the standard property disclosure forms and those covered everything required by law. Marcus asked if there was any way to ensure a specific document was left with the property. The agent said she could note in the file that a logbook was present in the cabin, that buyers would be welcome to it as part of the sale. Marcus drove back to the cabin and looked at the logbook on the kitchen table. He thought about taking it with him. He thought about what it would mean to take it. The buyers would arrive at the cabin without it, would have no record of the arrangement, no knowledge of the light or what the light meant. He thought about leaving it. He thought about whether leaving it was enough, whether a couple from Lexington who had bought a weekend cabin in eastern Kentucky would read a composition notebook left on a kitchen table before they unpacked their bags and made dinner and went to sleep on their first night. He left it on the shelf above the wood stove, the same shelf his great-uncle had left it on, in the same position where a person goes when they are making coffee or heating soup, visible from the kitchen, reachable without looking for it. Then he made sure the porch light was on, and he locked the front door, and he drove down the logging road for the last time. He does not go to that county anymore. He took a different route home, and he's taken different routes since, longer ones that do not require him to drive the logging road or pass the property or see the porch of the cabin from the road. He is not sure he could see the porch from the road. He does not know the sight lines well enough to know whether the cabin is visible from the county road at the bottom of the hill. He has not gone back to find out. He keeps a porch light on at his house in Columbus. He has kept one on since the night in the cabin, without interruption, replacing bulbs immediately when they go out, before anything else, before whatever else needs doing. His girlfriend asked him about it once. She had noticed that he replaced porch bulbs with an urgency that did not match the task, that a dead porch bulb produced in him a focused, almost anxious response that a dead bulb inside the house did not. She asked him why. He said it was just a habit, something he had gotten into. He did not explain further, and she did not push it, because they had been together long enough that she understood the difference between a habit he did not want to explain and a secret he was keeping, and she had decided this was the former. Marcus was not sure she was right about that, but he did not correct her. The property sold 6 months after he listed it. A couple from Lexington, young, renovating the cabin as a weekend place. The listing described it as secluded, wooded, historic charm, peaceful. The listing photographs showed the main room, the covered porch, the ridge view from the east-facing window. The photographs were taken in the morning, in good light, with the porch light off because it was daylight and the porch light did not need to be on. Marcus found the listing online after the sale was completed. He looked at the photographs for a while. He looked at the photograph of the covered porch, the old cast-iron fixture in the frame of the shot, the bulb in the socket. He looked at the eastern corner of the property visible at the edge of the porch photograph, the gap in the timber where the slope came down, the place where the logging road began. He thought about calling them. He found the contact through the listing, a name and a general location, enough to reach them if he decided to. He thought about what he would say. He thought about saying, "There is a logbook on the shelf above the wood stove. Read it before your first night. Read the last entry before you go to sleep. And whatever you do, keep the porch light on." He thought about how that would sound to two people from Lexington who had bought a weekend cabin and were excited about it and had not yet spent a night there. He did not call. He does not know if they found the logbook. He does not know if they read it before or after the first night, or if they read it at all, or if one of them picked it up and flipped through it and set it back down without reading it carefully, the way people set down old documents in unfamiliar places. He does not know if they understood the last entry. He does not know if they kept the porch light on. He thinks about it. Not every night, not with the quality of active worry, but with the low, persistent frequency of something that has no resolution and therefore no place to go. A thought that returns because it has nowhere to arrive. He replaced his porch bulb 2 weeks ago, a Tuesday evening. The bulb going at dusk with the particular flicker that precedes failure, and he had the replacement in the socket before the old one had finished cooling. His girlfriend was inside and did not see it. He stood on his porch in Columbus in the October dark for a moment after the new bulb came on, looking at the small circle of light on his front steps and the dark street beyond it. He thought about a cabin in eastern Kentucky and a composition notebook on a shelf, and a couple from Lexington who may or may not have read the last entry before they went to sleep on their first night in a place that had a rule they did not know about. He went inside. The porch light stayed on.